Hey, Bengals fans! Something interesting is happening around the Cincinnati Bengals. And while today's training camp didn't produce the kind of headline-grabbing moments fans often expect, the bigger picture around the league may have quietly worked in Cincinnati's favor. A couple of major contracts have been finalized elsewhere in the NFL, and each one provides another point of comparison for where the Bengals currently stand with some of their own roster decisions. At first glance, these stories might seem unrelated, but once you connect the dots, there's a very interesting conversation to have. Before we jump into everything, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy daily Bengals coverage. It helps the channel grow, and you won't miss the biggest updates as training camp continues to heat up. Now let's get to what really matters. Training camp itself was about as quiet as it could possibly be. There wasn't a major injury. There wasn't a surprise breakout performance making headlines. There wasn't a dramatic moment that had everyone talking afterward. In fact, it was described as a delightfully boring day, with Cincinnati essentially going through a walkthrough while the practice remained closed to the public. For fans hoping for explosive camp news, there simply wasn't much to report. Even around the league, veteran players were receiving maintenance days, reinforcing the idea that many organizations are simply trying to get through this stretch healthy before practices become more physical. The important thing is exactly that. Nothing negative happened for Cincinnati. No unexpected setbacks, no alarming developments, and with padded practices scheduled next, the intensity is expected to increase soon. While camp remained relatively calm, the biggest discussions shifted toward what was happening elsewhere in the NFL. The first major development came from Cleveland, where Denzel Ward agreed to a new 2-year extension worth $62 million. After earning 5 Pro Bowl selections, Ward has once again become a central piece of the Browns' future plans. Whether Cleveland wants to call it a rebuild, a retool, or something else entirely, one thing is clear from this contract. They view Ward as one of the leaders they want to keep around. From Cincinnati's perspective, the immediate reality is simple. The Bengals will continue seeing Denzel Ward twice every season. He's been one of Cleveland's best defensive players for years, and his presence has consistently given opposing offenses plenty to think about. Financially, Ward's new deal pushes his average annual salary into the neighborhood of $27 million while also providing significant guaranteed money. That naturally raises questions for Cincinnati because the Bengals have their own young defensive backs, whose futures will eventually require attention. DJ Turner immediately becomes part of this discussion. Current projections still estimate a potential 3-year contract worth approximately $63 million for Turner, placing him around the $20–21 million annual range if Cincinnati decides he is indeed their long-term answer at cornerback. Ward's extension doesn't completely reset the market, but it certainly becomes another contract that agents will reference during future negotiations. The conversation doesn't stop with Turner either. Dax Hill also enters the picture because both players could eventually point toward comparable deals around the league and argue that if division rivals are willing to reward their cornerstone defensive backs, Cincinnati should be prepared to do the same for its own developing talent. Fortunately for the Bengals, Ward's contract wasn't the kind of massive market-changing agreement that suddenly raises expectations for everyone else. Instead, it appears to be a very specific extension designed to keep a proven veteran in Cleveland while rewarding his consistent performance. That makes it less likely to dramatically reshape future negotiations in Cincinnati. Even so, it's another storyline worth monitoring as contract discussions continue to develop. The next major contract around the league may actually make the Bengals look even better. Chris Olave finally reached a long-awaited extension with the New Orleans Saints, signing a 4-year deal worth up to $132 million, with $90 million guaranteed. Almost immediately, comparisons began between Olave and T. Higgins. The comparison makes sense because both receivers have established themselves as highly productive NFL playmakers. According to the discussion surrounding these deals, Higgins has actually maintained a slight edge in overall production and efficiency during their NFL careers. Yet Olave's new agreement now places him ahead financially. Olave's average annual salary moves above Higgins, and the guaranteed money is substantially larger as well. That creates an interesting perspective on Cincinnati's offseason. Despite all the uncertainty that surrounded T. Higgins' future, the Bengals ultimately succeeded in keeping him. Considering where the receiver market continues to move, that decision now appears increasingly favorable when viewed against comparable contracts elsewhere in the league. There's another layer to this discussion. Higgins continues playing alongside another elite receiver in Cincinnati, while Olave occupies a different role within New Orleans. Their situations aren't identical, but the financial comparison still highlights that the Bengals secured Higgins before another major receiver contract pushed market expectations even higher. For Cincinnati fans, that's another encouraging development. There was a time when it genuinely felt uncertain whether ownership would find a way to keep T. Higgins. Questions surrounded the financial commitment required, and many wondered whether the organization would actually complete such an expensive deal. Instead, the agreement was reached. That outcome looks stronger every time another top receiver signs a new contract elsewhere around the league. The final major comparison centers on the defensive line. Philadelphia's Jalen Carter agreed to a massive 4-year extension worth up to $160 million, including $160 million in total value, with guarantees that establish him as the highest-paid defensive tackle in NFL history. Naturally, that immediately brings Cincinnati's own defensive tackle situation into focus. The Bengals previously committed to Dexter Lawrence through a structure that includes the remaining years of his contract before adding another season worth $28 million. When compared directly with Carter's new annual average, the difference becomes remarkable. Lawrence's figure sits roughly $10 million per season below Carter's new benchmark. Both players have been recognized among the league's top defensive tackles, making the financial comparison even more interesting. While future performance will always determine whether any contract ultimately proves worthwhile, Cincinnati currently appears to have secured a player viewed among the NFL's better defensive tackles without approaching the financial level required by the newest record-setting contract. Perhaps just as importantly, that situation is already settled. Instead of entering another off-season filled with uncertainty surrounding Lawrence's future, Cincinnati already addressed the contract structure. That allows the organization to focus elsewhere rather than preparing for another lengthy negotiation. When looking across these three major stories together, a common theme begins to emerge. Denzel Ward's extension reinforces the future contract discussions Cincinnati will eventually have with young defensive backs like DJ Turner and Dax Hill. Chris Olave's new agreement makes T. Higgins' contract appear increasingly favorable by comparison. Jalen Carter's record-setting extension makes Dexter Lawrence's financial commitment appear significantly more manageable relative to the evolving defensive tackle market. None of these developments directly changed the Bengals' roster today. However, each contract elsewhere around the NFL provides another benchmark, another comparison, and another reason to believe Cincinnati may be sitting in a stronger position than many initially realized. With padded practices approaching, attention will soon shift back to what happens on the field. Those sessions are expected to produce far more meaningful football storylines than today's quiet walkthrough. But while training camp remained relatively uneventful, the business side of the NFL continued moving, and several of those moves may have quietly benefited the Bengals. Now the focus turns back toward Cincinnati. Will DJ Turner eventually receive an extension of his own? How will future negotiations involving the secondary unfold? And after seeing comparable contracts across the league, do you feel even better about where the Bengals currently stand with T. Higgins and Dexter Lawrence? Let me know exactly what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear your opinion because these conversations are only going to become bigger as training camp moves forward and more contract decisions begin shaping the future of this roster. Who Dey?